I have built bridges that will outlast my grandchildren. I have poured concrete in freezing rain, negotiated contracts with men twice my size, and once talked a city inspector out of shutting down a $4 million project using nothing but a thermos of coffee and sheer audacity. I am not a man who freezes. Until that Monday morning, when I did. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me back up. It was 6:47 a.m. I remember because I always check my watch before I step onto a site. Old habit. The kind of morning where the air smells like wet gravel and diesel, and the sky can't quite decide if it wants to be gray or blue. My boots were already muddy. My foreman, a thick-necked guy named Holt, had already flagged 3 problems before I'd even had my first cup of coffee, which frankly should be illegal. Nicholas said to himself, "Nobody gets to ruin my morning before caffeine. That's just assault." There was a food truck parked about 40 feet from the site entrance, bright yellow. One of those cheerful, aggressively optimistic food trucks that looks like it belongs at a farmer's market not wedged between a porta-potty and a pile of rebar. A small chalkboard sign out front read, "Stella's Kitchen, hot coffee, hot food, happy soul." I remember thinking that for exactly 4 seconds, before everything stopped. Because the woman leaning out of that window to hand a hard hat a paper cup, that woman was 8 months pregnant, moving slowly the way women do when they're carrying the whole world in front of them, wearing a yellow apron that matched the truck, hair pulled back, face tilted down. And then she looked up. And I felt the ground do something ground is not supposed to do. It shifted. Her name, my daughter-in-law's name, left my mouth before my brain could stop it. Nicholas said, barely above a whisper. "Stella?" She heard it. I know she heard it because her entire body responded before her face did. Her shoulders pulled inward. The paper cup in her hand trembled. And when her eyes finally met mine, those brown eyes I had watched cry at her wedding, the same eyes that had looked at my son like he personally hung the moon, they were filled with something I was not prepared for. Pure, unfiltered, terror, not surprise, not embarrassment, terror. Like I was the last person on earth she wanted to see. And I'm her father-in-law. I coach her fantasy football team. I taught her how to make my mother's cornbread. Terror was not the reaction I was supposed to get. She recovered fast. I'll give her that. Pasted on something that was trying very hard to be a smile, and was failing spectacularly. Stella said, her voice barely holding together, "Nicholas. Hi. What are you? I didn't know you were working this site." Nicholas said, because apparently my mouth had decided to handle this without consulting the rest of me, I could say the same thing. "Stella, what in the world are you doing out here?" You look like you're about to," Stella said, cutting me off quickly. "I'm fine. I'm completely fine. Coffee? It's a dark roast. I know you like dark roast." Stella said, "It's a good blend. I drive to this supplier in," Nicholas said, firmer this time. "Stella, look at me." She stopped. She looked at me, and whatever wall she'd been trying to build in the last 30 seconds crumbled completely. Her chin wobbled first. Then her eyes glassed over. Then one tear, just one, like a scout, slid down her left cheek. And through a voice that was held together with nothing but willpower and desperation, she said, Stella said, please don't tell him I'm here. Now, I need you to understand something about me. I am 61 years old. I have been married to the same woman for 34 years. I have raised one son, and I have watched that boy become a man I was genuinely proud of, Brennan Stafford. My boy, 6'2", sharp as a tack, successful enough that his mother cried the day he bought his first house. The kind of son you brag about at cookouts without even trying to be subtle about it. So when his pregnant wife, 8 months pregnant, visibly exhausted, standing in a food truck at a construction site at 6:47 in the morning, begged me with everything she had not to tell my son she was there, I did what any reasonable, rational, emotionally intelligent father-in-law would do. Nicholas said, I'm sorry, what? 61 years of life experience, and that's what came out. Stella said, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, glancing over my shoulder like she was checking if anyone was watching. I know how this looks. I know. But I need you to trust me right now. Nicholas, please, just don't call him. Nicholas said, Stella, You've been missing for 3 months. 3 months. Do you have any idea what your mother calls Lorraine every other day? We filed a, I know and I'm sorry, but there are things happening that I cannot explain to you right now. Not here. Not like this. Please just order a coffee, walk away, and pretend you didn't see me. I stared at her. Nicholas said, You want me to order a coffee? Stella said, Dark roast. $4. Nicholas said, Stella, you are 8 months pregnant, working a food truck at a construction site in November, and you want me to hand you $4 and walk away like I didn't just find my missing daughter-in-law serving coffee between a porta-potty and a pile of steel beams? She almost laughed. Almost. There was a flicker of it. The old Stella, the one who used to laugh at my terrible jokes at Sunday dinners, and then it vanished just as fast. Stella said, I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But Nicholas, I need you to hear me. She reached through the window and grabbed my hand. Hers was cold, shaking. I left to protect this baby. That's all I can say. I left to protect this baby. And there it was. 6 words that cracked something open in my chest that I didn't know could crack. I left to protect this baby. Not I needed space. Not Brennan and I are having problems. Not any of the dozen explanations I had rehearsed in the 3 months since she'd vanished. I left to protect this baby. From what? From who? I looked at my daughter-in-law's face, really looked, the way you look at something when you suddenly suspect you've been reading it wrong for years, and a thought began forming in the back of my mind. Slow at first, like a crack in concrete you almost miss. Almost, Nicholas said quietly, carefully, the way you speak when you're suddenly afraid of your own question. Stella, does this have anything to do with Brennan? Her jaw tightened. Just a flicker. But I've been reading faces on job sites for 30 years. I know what a person looks like when they're deciding how much of the truth to give you. And what she said next, 3 words, delivered so carefully, they felt rehearsed. I stood at that window for another long moment. The site was waking up around me. Boots on gravel. Someone's radio playing country music 3 trailers down. Holt hollering something about a delivery. The whole ordinary morning continuing like the ground hadn't just shifted under my feet. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a 5, slid it through the window. Nicholas said, looking her dead in the eyes, Keep the change. And Stella, I'll be back at lunch. She opened her mouth. Nicholas said, Don't argue with me. I'm still your father-in-law. I walked back toward the site. Didn't look back. Couldn't. Because if I had looked back, she would have seen my face. And my face in that moment was doing something I hadn't let it do since the night my father died. It was falling apart. Because somewhere between please don't tell him and I left to protect this baby, a question had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter of rebar. Cold, sharp, and impossible to ignore. What exactly had my son done? And the darker, quieter question beneath it, the one I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. What exactly did I not know about the man I raised? If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I have never been a man who talks to himself. That's always been Lorraine's department. She holds full conversations with the dishwasher, argues with the television, and once spent 20 minutes explaining to a houseplant why it was being dramatic. I married a woman who talks to plants. 34 years and I still find it charming. But that Monday, driving home from the site at 6:30 in the evening, I talked to myself the entire 40-minute drive. Nicholas said, to nobody in particular, both hands gripping the steering wheel like it owed him money, She's protecting the baby. From what? From who? From Brennan? My Brennan? The same Brennan who cried at the end of Marley and Me and tried to pretend he had something in his eye? That Brennan? The steering wheel didn't answer. Unhelpful. I had gone back to the food truck at lunch, exactly like I promised, and Stella had looked at me with those exhausted eyes and said exactly 11 words. Stella said, "Not here, Nicholas. Tonight. There's a diner on Mercer called Patty's. 8 o'clock. And then she'd handed me a grilled cheese sandwich and charged me $7, which honestly felt like a personal attack given the circumstances. So now I was driving home to my wife, to Lorraine, to the woman who has shared every secret, every fear, every terrible decision and brilliant idea with me for 34 years. Except I needed to think before I spoke to Lorraine. Because here's the thing about my wife that I love deeply and find occasionally terrifying. Lorraine Stafford does not have a poker face. The woman cannot lie. She cannot even withhold information gracefully. When she knows something she's not supposed to tell you, she gets this look, this very specific, very particular tightening around her eyes, like she's physically holding the words inside her mouth with her jaw muscles. I had seen that look before. I had seen it the week before Stella disappeared. I just hadn't known what I was looking at. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, making her Monday pasta, the one with the Italian sausage and the cherry tomatoes that she's been making since 1987 and refuses to change a single ingredient of, because, as she puts it, Lorraine said, "If it's not broken, Nicholas, we don't fix it." She said that about the pasta. She said that about our couch. She said that about our marriage twice. Both times during arguments, she was winning. I set my keys on the counter, washed my hands at the sink, watched her stir the pot with the easy practiced rhythm of a woman completely at home in her own Monday evening. And then I said it, Nicholas said, casually, the way you drop a match into dry grass and step back. "I saw Stella today." The spoon stopped. Just for a half second. Just a fraction of a pause that a stranger would never catch. But I'm not a stranger. I'm her husband of 34 years. "I catch everything," Lorraine said, her voice landing just a half note too controlled. "Oh?" Nicholas said, "Yeah. She's working a food truck, out on the Mercer construction site. 8 months pregnant, running a whole operation by herself." Lorraine said, "Is she okay?" Now, here's what's interesting, and stay with me here because this matters. She did not say, "What? Stella? Our Stella? How? Where has she been?" She did not say, "Oh my God, Nicholas, are you serious right now?" She did not drop the spoon. She did not spin around. She did not do any of the 12 things a woman does when she hears genuinely shocking news for the first time. She said, "Is she okay?" Like someone who already knew Stella existed in the world and was simply receiving a status update. I let that sit in the air between us for a long moment. Let it breathe. Let her feel it. Nicholas said, slow and deliberate, "Lorraine." Lorraine said, "The pasta's almost ready, you should sit down." Nicholas said, "Lorraine, look at me." She turned around, and there it was. That tightening around her eyes. That jaw muscle working overtime. 34 years of marriage, and she still thinks she can hide it from me. Nicholas said gently, "Because I know my wife, and I know that pushing Lorraine Stafford too hard is like pushing a door that opens inward. You just end up hurting yourself. How long have you known where she was?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Lorraine said, "Nicholas." Nicholas said, "How long?" The spoon went down on the counter, carefully, the way you set something down when your hands might not be steady enough to hold it. Lorraine said, not meeting my eyes, 6 weeks. The kitchen went very quiet. Nicholas said, 6 weeks. Lorraine said, "She called me. She made me promise." Nicholas said, 6 weeks, Lorraine. "I have been calling hospitals. I have been driving past her mother's house. I called 3 of her college friends, whose names I could barely remember. 6 weeks ago, while I was doing all of that, you already knew she was okay." Lorraine said, and her voice cracked right down the middle. "She made me promise, Nicholas. She's my daughter-in-law. She called me from a gas station payphone crying so hard I could barely understand her. And she said, 'Mom, I need you to know I'm alive, but I need you to not tell anyone.' And what was I supposed to do? What would you have done?" And the honest, terrible answer was, I didn't know. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. The pasta was bubbling softly behind Lorraine. The kitchen smelled like it always smelled on Mondays. Garlic and tomato and home. Everything warm and familiar and suddenly slightly tilted, like a picture frame knocked 2 degrees off center. Nicholas said, "Does this have something to do with Brennan?" And this time she didn't deflect. She didn't reach for the pasta or check the stove or find something in the kitchen to busy her hands with. She just looked at me, with those eyes I have known for 34 years, and what I saw in them was not guilt, it was not evasion, it was grief, the quiet, private grief of a woman who has been carrying something very heavy, completely alone, for a very long time. Lorraine said, barely above a whisper, "There are things I need to tell you, Nicholas. Things I should have told you a long time ago. But I need you to promise me something first." Nicholas said, "Promise me. Before I say a single word, promise me that you will hear everything before you react, all of it. Because if you react in the middle, I'll lose my nerve and I won't be able to finish." I looked at my wife, at the woman who irons her pillowcases and argues with houseplants and has made the same pasta every Monday for 37 years. The woman I thought I knew every corner of. Nicholas said, "Talk to me." She folded her hands on the table. Draw a long breath. And began. She started 30 years ago. 30 years ago, when Brennan was 4 years old, I was working on a project in Galveston that kept me away from home for 11 weeks straight. 11 weeks of phone calls and care packages and missing my family so badly it sat in my chest like a stone. 11 weeks during which my wife, my Lorraine, had been lonelier than she'd ever told me. She didn't dress it up. I'll give her that. She told it plainly, the way you confess something you've rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror, quickly, before the courage runs out. There had been someone, a man from her book club. It lasted 6 weeks. It had ended before I came home. She had spent the last 30 years making sure it never touched our marriage, never touched our son, never touched anything she loved. I sat completely still, Nicholas said, and my voice came out strange and flat in a way I didn't recognize. "Brennan?" It wasn't a question. Lorraine said, "I don't know." "Nicholas, I genuinely don't know the timing. It could have been either way. I have never known for certain. And for 30 years I told myself that not knowing was enough, that it didn't matter, that you were his father in every way that counted." Nicholas said, "Does Stella know?" The missing piece. The crack I'd almost missed. Lorraine said, the words coming faster now like water through a broken dam. She found something. When she was going through old family medical records for the pregnancy. She's thorough. You know how thorough she is. She found a document, an old paternity thing had done privately years ago. The results were inconclusive. But the fact that it existed at all, Nicholas, she's smart. She put it together. She confronted me 3 months ago, and I couldn't lie to her face. I couldn't. Nicholas said, "So she's been out there 8 months pregnant, carrying this." Lorraine said, "She didn't want to tell Brennan without knowing the truth. She said she refused to blow up his entire identity on an inconclusive result. She said she needed to protect the baby from being born into chaos, into a family crisis. She wanted answers first." Nicholas said, "And you've been helping her from here." Lorraine said, "I've been sending her money every 2 weeks. Through her mother." I stood up from the table, slowly, walked to the window above the sink, and stood there looking out at the backyard. At the oak tree I planted the year Brennan started kindergarten. At the tire swing that had been hanging from it for 25 years, barely used, mostly decorative, stubbornly refusing to rot. I thought about my son, my Brennan, 6'2", sharp as a tack. Cried at Marley and me. I thought about the night he was born, the weight of him in my arms, the specific, unrepeatable feeling of looking at a person for the first time and thinking, that one's mine. And I thought, does it matter? Nicholas said, to the window, to the oak tree, to nobody. Does it change anything? If the answer came back wrong, does it change in a single day of 30 years? Lorraine said behind me, her voice wet and small, that's what I've been asking myself for 3 decades. I turned around. Nicholas said, what time is it? Lorraine said, confused, almost 7:30. Why? Nicholas said, reaching for my keys off the counter, because I have a meeting at Patty's Diner on Mercer at 8 o'clock, and I think it's time we got some answers. Lorraine said, Nicholas said, get your coat, Lorraine. She looked at me. Something moved across her face. Relief, terror, love, guilt, all of it tangled together in that way that only 34 years can produce. She got her coat. We drove to Patty's Diner in silence. Not the bad kind of silence. Not the cold, weaponized silence of a marriage in crisis. The kind of silence that exists between two people who have said the most important thing and are now simply breathing through it together, side by side, the way we had always done everything. I reached across the center console somewhere on Mercer Street and put my hand over hers. She turned her palm up and held on. And I thought about Stella, sitting alone in that yellow food truck for 3 months, 8 months pregnant, guarding a secret big enough to swallow a family whole, waiting for someone to find her, waiting for someone to walk up to that window and force the conversation she couldn't start herself. I thought of all the construction sites in this city, of all the mornings, of all the food trucks. I thought maybe the ground didn't shift that morning. Maybe it had been shifting for 30 years. and I just finally felt it. Patty's diner came into view, yellow lights spilling out onto the dark street. And through the window, in a corner booth, I could see a yellow apron and a woman sitting very still, waiting. Nicholas said so quietly Lorraine almost didn't hear it. "Whatever happens in there, we go in together." Lorraine said, "Together." I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and we walked in. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. I have learned exactly 3 things about diners in my 61 years of living. 1. The coffee is always either perfect or criminal. No in between. 2. The lighting is always slightly too honest. The kind of fluorescent truth that makes everyone look like they haven't slept since 2019. And 3. More real conversations happen in corner booths of diners than in any therapist's office, courtroom, or church combined. Something about the vinyl seats and the laminated menus makes people tell the truth. Maybe it's the pie. Patty's diner smelled like bacon grease and coffee and something cinnamon rotating slowly in a glass case by the register. A woman behind the counter, presumably Patty, built like someone who has survived several decades of difficult customers and is prepared to survive several more, pointed us toward the back without being asked. She'd seen people walk in with our faces before. People who needed a corner booth. Stella saw us the moment we walked in. Both of us. I watched her face do something complicated, relief and panic arriving at the exact same time, fighting for the same real estate. Her eyes went from me to Lorraine and back to me, and I could see the calculation happening, the rapid mental arithmetic of a woman trying to figure out how much had already been said. Nicholas said, sliding into the booth across from her, keeping my voice easy and low. "Before you say anything," she told me. "All of it," Stella said, looking at Lorraine. "Mom," Lorraine said, sliding in beside me, reaching across the table and covering Stella's hand with both of hers. "I know, baby. I know. But we couldn't keep doing this. You're 8 months pregnant and sitting alone in a diner, and that's not how this family operates," Stella said. "This family is built on a secret." Patty's waitress, 17 years old, completely unbothered, the way only teenagers in diners can be, appeared and asked if we wanted coffee. All 3 of us said yes simultaneously, with an urgency that probably concerned her. She brought 4 cups, poured one for herself at the counter. Good instincts, that girl. We sat there for a moment, the 3 of us, steam rising from 3 coffee cups, the weight of 30 years sitting in the middle of the table like a 4th person nobody wanted to acknowledge. Nicholas said, looking at Stella directly. "Tell me what you found," Stella said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "It started with the baby. I needed a full family medical history. Both sides. Everything. Brennan was useless about it. You know how he is about paperwork," Stella said, and the ghost of a smile crossed her face. "So I went through the old filing boxes in the storage unit, the ones Lorraine gave us when we moved into the house. I was looking for anything, immunization records, old physicals, anything genetic, and I found a folder, tucked inside an old tax return from 1994, a private lab report." Nicholas said. "The paternity test." Stella said. It was inconclusive. But Nicholas, the fact that it existed, the fact that Lorraine had quietly ordered a private paternity test on her 4-year-old son and filed it inside a tax return from 1994, she stopped, swallowed. "I'm not stupid." Nicholas said, "Nobody in this booth thinks you're stupid." Stella said, "I confronted Lorraine. She confirmed it. And I sat in my car outside this woman's house." She gestured at Lorraine, but gently, without malice, for 40 minutes, just trying to figure out what on earth I was supposed to do with that information. Nicholas said, "And you decided to disappear." Stella said, "I decided to protect my child." Nicholas, I was not going to bring a baby into a house where I was sitting on a bomb that size. One wrong moment, one bad day, one argument where it slips out, and Brennan's entire identity explodes, his entire life. Everything he thinks he knows about himself. I wouldn't do that without knowing the actual truth first. Nicholas said, "So what have you been doing for 3 months?" Stella said, lifting her chin slightly. "I found a doctor willing to do a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It takes fetal DNA from my blood work and compares it to potential family members." The table went very quiet. Nicholas said, "Carefully, Stella. That test determines the baby's paternity, not Brennan's. Stella said, I know. But the lab, they also ran a secondary comparison. Brennan's DNA, from an old sample I had from an ancestry kit we did 2 years ago, against the Stafford family profile. Lorraine said, barely breathing, and Stella opened her purse, pulled out an envelope, set it on the table between us. It sat there, white, ordinary looking, the most dangerous piece of paper I had ever seen in my 61 years. Stella said, it came yesterday. I haven't opened it. Nicholas said, yesterday. Stella said, I don't know what I wanted. I think I wanted a witness. I think I wanted family around me when I opened it, which is insane. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my wife. I looked at my daughter-in-law. 8 months pregnant, exhausted, brave in a way that made my chest hurt. And I made a decision. Nicholas said, open it. Stella said, Nicholas. Nicholas said firmly, but with everything I had, open it. Right now, in this booth. The three of us. Whatever it says, we deal with it together, as a family. Tonight. Lorraine said, Nicholas. Nicholas said, we are not leaving this diner with that envelope unopened. I am 61 years old and I have been through too much today to spend one more hour not knowing. Open the envelope. Then she picked it up. Her hands were shaking. I reached across and steadied them with mine, just for a second, just enough, and then let her do it herself. She deserved to do it herself. The paper unfolded. Her eyes moved across the page. And I watched her face. I have read faces for 30 years. Job sites, boardrooms, hospital waiting rooms, my son's school principal's office. Twice. And every poker game my brother has hosted since 1998. I know what a face looks like when it gets the answer it was dreading. That is not what I saw. What I saw was release. The specific physical release of a person who's been holding their breath for 3 months, finally letting it go. Stella said, her voice breaking open like sunlight through cloud cover. He's yours. Nicholas, Brennan is yours. Fully. Conclusively. Lorraine made a sound I had never heard her make before. Something between a sob and a laugh that came from somewhere so deep it didn't have a name. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. I sat very still. 30 years of a question I didn't even know I was carrying. Answered in a Formica booth in Patty's Diner on a Monday night over 3 cups of coffee. Nicholas said, to nobody, to the table, to the oak tree I planted the year my son started kindergarten. Of course he is. We sat in that booth for 2 more hours. We talked. Really talked. The way families talk when the performance is finally over and there's nothing left to protect. Lorraine told Stella everything. Not the edited version she'd been carrying alone, but the whole ugly human complicated truth. And Stella listened. And I watched 2 women I loved more than I was generally comfortable admitting navigate something most families would have been destroyed by. By the time we left, Patty's was nearly empty. The teenager had gone home. The woman behind the counter, definitely Patty, was wiping down the counter and pretending not to have heard a single word of our entire evening, which I respected enormously. Nicholas said, leaving a tip large enough to communicate genuine gratitude. Good pie, Patty said, without looking up. Honey, you weren't here for the pie. Fair enough. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, Nicholas, but what about Brennan? What about your son? Does he ever find out? Oh, he finds out. Just not the way any of us planned. Here's what happened. 3 days after the diner, Stella agreed to come home. Not to the house she shared with Brennan. Not yet, but to ours. Lorraine set up the guest room, bought approximately $47 worth of pregnancy pillows, and proceeded to cook for Stella with an intensity that could only be described as maternal guilt in casserole form. And Brennan, my son, my conclusively biological son, the man who cried at Marley and me, had no idea any of this was happening. Until Thursday morning he showed up at our front door. I opened it. He was standing on the porch in his work clothes, holding a coffee looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in 3 months. Which, fair, Brennan said. Dad, have you... I got a weird feeling. I don't know how to explain it. I just needed to... Is Mom home? Nicholas said, stepping aside. Come in, son. He walked into the living room. Stopped. Stella was sitting on the couch. Yellow socks. Pregnancy pillow. Bowl of cereal. She looked up at him. He looked at her. And Brennan Stafford, 6'2", sharp as a tack, successful enough to make his mother cry. Sat down on the floor. Not on the armchair, not on the other couch. On the floor. Like his legs had simply filed a resignation letter. Brennan said, barely a whisper. Stella. Stella said, "Hi." Brennan said, You're here. His eyes dropped to her stomach, enormous and round and impossible to miss. Something crossed his face that I recognized immediately because I had felt it myself 30 years ago, standing in a hospital room holding a son for the first time. Is the baby okay? Not where have you been? Not how could you leave? Not do you know what these 3 months have done to me? Is the baby okay? Stella said, and her voice did something soft and devastated. The baby is perfect. I looked at my wife. She was already crying, silently, the good kind. I let them talk. Lorraine and I went to the kitchen and made coffee we didn't need, and found 100 small tasks to occupy our hands with, and we let our son and his wife sit in our living room and begin the long, necessary, painful work of telling each other the truth. All of it. Here is where the revenge part comes in. Because you've been patient, and you deserve it. Approximately 3 weeks after Stella came home, when things had begun, slowly, carefully, to find their footing again, a name came up that I had not thought about in 30 years, the man from the book club. His name doesn't matter. What matters is that he was, apparently, still alive and well, and living 40 minutes outside the city. Semi-retired. Comfortable. Completely unaware that for 30 years his brief 6-week catastrophe of a decision had been sitting like unexploded ordnance inside someone else's family. He found out, though, not from me, not from Lorraine, from Stella. Because Stella, my daughter-in-law, who had spent 3 months alone in a yellow food truck protecting a family that didn't even fully know it needed protecting, had quietly, methodically spent some of those 3 months doing research. She had found him, documented everything. And she had sent a very detailed, very precise, completely legal letter to his current wife, his adult children. And here is the part that I will never stop being quietly delighted by. The local historical society board he sat on as a respected community elder. The letter contained no accusations, no drama, no demands, just questions. Specific, pointed, chronologically accurate questions that only a man with something to hide would struggle to answer. Nicholas said, when Stella told me, trying very hard to keep my face neutral, that was thorough. Stella said, butter wouldn't melt. I had a lot of time in that food truck. Nicholas said, apparently. Stella said, he also owes 30 years of karma. I simply helped it find the address. I looked at this woman, this extraordinary, complicated, ferociously intelligent woman who had walked into our family 5 years ago and quietly become its backbone without any of us fully noticing. Nicholas said, Brennan doesn't deserve you. Stella said, I know, but I love him anyway. Nicholas said, that's very generous of you. Stella said, I'm aware. The baby came on a Friday morning, 6 weeks after all of this. A girl, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Absolutely furious about being born, which Lorraine says is a Stafford trait and I choose to take as a compliment. They named her June. I held her in the hospital room while Brennan filled out paperwork. Because some things are genetic, and his relationship with paperwork is apparently my fault. And Stella watched me from the bed with tired eyes and expression I couldn't quite name. Nicholas said to June very quietly, so only she could hear, you have no idea what we went through to get you here safely. Absolutely no idea. And held on. Nicholas said to the room, to the oak tree 40 minutes away, to 30 years of questions finally answered in fluorescent light and corner booths and yellow food trucks. Welcome to the family, June Stafford. But I have never built anything, not one single thing in 61 years. As sturdy as what was rebuilt in this family over 3 months of secrets, 1 diner booth, and a woman in a yellow apron who was brave enough to say please don't tell him to exactly the right person. Because sometimes the cracks in a foundation aren't the end of the structure. Sometimes they're just showing you where it needed to be stronger all along. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most important thing a man can do is walk up to a food truck window on a Monday morning, order a dark roast, and refuse to walk away, even when he's told to. Especially when he's told to. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.